I know it's not the Daytona 500, but I have a feeling a lot of NASCAR fans are going to want to watch this Sunday's race at Atlanta very closely because this is going to be our first official glimpse at what this new intermediate aero package is going to look like with a full field and with a full competition. How's it going, everyone? My name is Eric, and welcome to Out of the Groove. And yeah, today's episode is going to mainly focus on Atlanta. We're going to talk a little bit about what we can expect with this very new and unique aero package this weekend on the Cup side of things. But before we get into that, there's some other kind of just fun news and notes I wanted to talk about. I haven't listened to the full episode yet or anything, but on Dale Jr.'s podcast this week, Tony Stewart stopped by as a guest. He said some pretty interesting things. I've seen some quotes of his floating around over the last few days, but one thing I took away, one thing I heard that was really interesting to me was his conversation about which drivers he thinks have the most raw talent. Driver skill is a pretty hard thing to gauge in NASCAR, in my opinion, because so much of a driver's performance is based on just their equipment that they're running. Tony Stewart started talking about how some drivers have raw talent and then there's also taught talent. Here's what he said. There's guys that have raw talent and then there's taught talent. You can sit there and watch videos, you can study, you can talk to people. Raw talent are guys that don't have to think about what they do. They just get in and do it. It's not taught. Stewart then went on to say which driver he thinks has the most raw talent in NASCAR, and he threw out the name Kyle Larson, which is one we've heard a lot of people talk about. Tony Stewart also threw the name out Christopher Bell as far as drivers who he thinks have the most raw talent in NASCAR today. He said, I'm not picking them because they're dirt track guys by any means, but you look at what Kyle does in a car. He overdrives everything he does, but he can still make it work. I mean, there's times he's got that thing sideways and saves it, and it's like, there's not a lot of guys that could save it and push it that hard for that long and not make that mistake. Add Tony Stewart to the list of Cup drivers I've heard say really good things about Kyle Larson the last few years. Now, this might be the greatest compliment I've heard. For him to say that Kyle Larson has the most raw talent in the sport, ahead of guys like Kyle Busch or Chase Elliott, kind of interesting to me. Now, he explains what raw talent is. I don't think he's saying here that Kyle Larson is necessarily the best driver in NASCAR. Maybe that's what he means, but I don't know if that's necessarily what he's saying. I'll bet he thinks Kyle Larson's a top 3 or top 4 guy in NASCAR. Because when I think about taught talent, I think of Kyle Busch. He's really good, and he's been racing mainly on asphalt his whole career. I think of Chase Elliott, who he had a great teacher in his father for years, so I tend to think he's got some taught talent. But yeah, when he's talking about raw talent, sure, Kyle Larson just seems to get in whatever he drives and succeed in it. So I can understand what Tony Stewart's saying there. I'm a Kyle Larson guy. I think Kyle Larson is honestly better than his equipment shows. But I do think it's interesting to hear a past NASCAR champion, a 3-time NASCAR champion, who does come from a dirt, open-wheel background. But it is interesting to hear him kind of give his thoughts on who the most talented guys in the sport are today. And Kyle Larson continues to get a lot of praise from people both inside and outside the sport. Kyle Larson hasn't won a race, however, in almost a year and a half, so he's kind of riding a pretty long winless streak, but hopefully his luck starts to turn around soon. Now, speaking of Kyle Larson, I promise this wasn't supposed to be a Kyle Larson-themed show, but we had some new paint schemes revealed this weekend. Both Bubba Wallace and Kyle Larson are running McDonald's cars this week. Now, McDonald's has been in the sport for a while. They're going to be on Kyle Larson's car for a number of races this year, so McDonald's, not a new sponsor, but these new looks are kind of, whoa. We talk paint schemes on this show a lot. It's a fun thing that NASCAR fans like to discuss and share their opinions on, and I'm no different, so that's what we're doing right here, right now. Let's start with Kyle Larson's car. Now, I have to say, I love this paint scheme a lot. I think this is my favorite McDonald's paint scheme that I've seen to date. Now, I tweeted that, and a lot of you guys sent me your responses like, oh, what about this car, what about this car? Those are all good, don't get me wrong. McDonald's has had a lot of great race cars. Even the one that Jamie McMurray ran last year I thought was outstanding. But that being said, this one is, in my opinion, the most McDonald's-looking car I have seen. Like, when I think McDonald's, I think red with yellow arches. That's literally all this car is. I want to see what it looks like on the track, of course, but what I've seen so far, it's nice, y'all. Darrell Wallace Jr.'s, on the other hand, I'm less a fan of. I saw more people kind of criticizing this one. I will say it's interesting for a Richard Petty Motorsports car to not have that little swoosh by the number, so that's kind of weird. Maybe they're trying to move away from that now. Maybe McDonald's didn't want them to put it there. I don't know. This car is doing some of the same things the Kyle Larson car was doing, but I just don't like the colors. Yellow on red looks great. Yellow on white, ugh, don't really like that. Also, the fact that the number is in like a red box and then the roof is a little bit odd. This one's questionable. I will say that. This one is a little more questionable. But these two paint schemes got a lot of people talking over the weekend. McDonald's, good to see that they're still heavily invested in NASCAR, and cool to see that they're expanding their partnership even to include Bubba Wallace. So, pretty sweet deal. Pretty excited to see these cars on track. Hopefully they run well. So now we've gotten all the fun stuff out of the way. Let's talk about the aero package that we're going to see this weekend in Atlanta. I'll give my actual predictions, like race winner and stuff here at the very end, but to start with, let's talk about what we can maybe expect from this aero package. Now let's be clear here, this is the first race this year where we're going to see the tapered spacer cut the horsepower down to 550. This week, the aero ducts are not going to be the same as they are at most of the other mile and a halves. At most other mile and a halves, the aero ducts are in place to kind of help with airflow and help eliminate the problem of dirty air. This week, however, they're not going to have that effect. It's more going to be about cooling the brakes, so aero ducts kind of irrelevant as far as the package is concerned this week. Still going to have the big rear spoiler, still going to have the new splitter. So this is almost a full version of the aero package we tested at Las Vegas a few weeks back. But it's not the same. Keep that in mind. The stuff we saw in that test at Las Vegas, I don't expect to see an exact copy of that this weekend at Atlanta. It's going to be a little bit different. So like how we saw in the Las Vegas test, cars could kind of stay in a pack and kind of draft with each other for 10, 15, 20 laps at a time. At Atlanta, I would tend to think that that's going to be a shorter number of laps. After restart, you might see kind of pack racing in a sense for 5, 6, 7 laps, but I feel like in Atlanta, the tires are going to wear faster, handling is going to come into play a lot quicker, and I think it is going to look a little different than what we saw in Las Vegas. Now keep in mind though, at Las Vegas during that testing session, the most cars we saw in a pack were 14. We're going to have 40 on Sunday, so it's really hard to predict. Bob Pockers from Fox tweeted this in response to a fan saying that drivers are going to have to use the brakes at Atlanta, something that we didn't see too much of in the Las Vegas test. Now Ryan Blaney also chimed in though and did say that they're going to be wide open for a handful of laps, he thinks. So that kind of helps reinforce what I'm thinking here. I think on restarts we're going to see 5, 6, 7 laps of almost flat out racing, around the high banks of Atlanta. You're going to see drafting, you're going to see a little bit of pack racing come into play, but pretty quick into the run, I think you're going to see cars start to space out. They're going to have to lift, maybe even use the brakes a little bit. Handling is going to come into play, and I think overall this race is going to still feel kind of like your typical Atlanta race that we've seen in recent years. Again, we are going to have the lower horsepower and the high downforce in this race, which is, basically the basis of this new package. But with the air ducts the way they are, and with the track surface being as old and worn out as it is, whatever racing we see here on Sunday, I don't think it's going to be super indicative of what we're going to see at most other mile and a halves this year. When we go to Las Vegas, Texas, Charlotte, Chicagoland, Kansas, most every other mile and a half almost, we're going to see a slightly different package than what we see this Sunday. So I only say all this because I don't want NASCAR fans to jump to conclusion if the racing this weekend isn't that great. I don't want people to jump to conclusion on this package just yet because it's still not the full version that we're going to see at the majority of mile and a halves this year. I will say though, last year's Atlanta race, if I recall, was pretty slow, pretty dull, not that exciting, so I think anything's going to be an improvement this year. But we'll see. Now let's talk about predictions. Let's give some picks. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this every week on this show. Last year I was able to do predictions episodes sometimes, but not before every race. But this week I am going to be able to give you guys kind of some Atlanta predictions. Like I said, not sure if I'm going to be able to do this every single week, but anyway, you got them now. It's our first intermediate race of the year, new package, and really unpredictable in a lot of ways. Not sure what to expect, but I'm going to have to pick Kevin Harvick as my race winner this week. I just mentioned how last year's race was kind of a snooze fest. That's largely because Kevin Harvick dominated that thing. Fords looked real fast at Daytona, but now this is going to be the first real test for the Mustang, going to a track where handling matters more than what we saw at Daytona. Like last year, we saw how Chevy ran pretty well at Daytona, even won the Daytona 500, but then the very next week at Atlanta and kind of going forward, last year Chevy struggled. So we'll see. This is kind of the first week's test for the Mustang. But that being said, the Fords did look strong last week, and this kind of just has Kevin Harvick's name written all over it. So I'm going with Harvick. Let me know who you guys' picks to win at Atlanta are down in the comments. Keep an eye on those Gibbs cars though. They did finish 1, 2, 3 last weekend, and they didn't really run that well in the Clash or the duels, but then when the Daytona 500 rolled around, those Gibbs cars were as good as anyone. So maybe they were saving their best for the 500. So we'll see what they have here at Atlanta. I'll be interested to see. They have the oldest body, the oldest chassis now of any of the manufacturers. Chevy's is only a year old, Ford's is brand new. Toyota, this one they're running right now, is 3 years old. So, you'd think that they should have a pretty good handle on it by now. So look for Toyota to run very well this weekend in Atlanta. Anyway, you guys, those are my predictions. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Remember, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram. Those links to my other social medias are down below in the description. You can also get yourself an Out of the Groove t-shirt if you want to help support me, support the show. Check that out as well. Also, my P.O. Box address is down in the description. If you want to send me some cool NASCAR stuff, I'll show it off and I'll shout you out in a future episode. And then, of course, a big thank you to my Patreon supporters. Big shout out Michael Harrison, @Jews of the Stars, SelfishGifts.com, Mentally Defective, Cameron James Ticemore, John Koblenz, Tim Shingen, Jason R. Long, Wesley Donaldson, Isaac Dennison, Mika Suzuki, iFantasyRace.com, and the rest of these amazing supporters. Thank you all so much for the support. It really helps this show out. a tremendous amount, and we got some pretty exciting things in the work. You know, I know Eric Almirola was on the show last week. That's pretty cool. I'm gonna be at a World of Outlaws race tomorrow night, weather permitting. So I should have a video from that coming up later this week. Actually, when you're watching this, I guess you're watching this Friday, so the race is tonight. Actually, I'll be at a World of Outlaws race, so expect a video from that maybe next week. I've also got some other exciting things in the work regarding races I might be attending this year. So I'll keep you posted on that. A lot of exciting things happening on this channel, and a large portion of it is due to the support I get from you guys on Patreon, so thank you. I also encourage you to check out Roar NASCAR magazine, Roar, R-O-A-R, exclamation point magazine. It's a digital magazine run by the people at NASCAR Pole Position. They're super cool. I've been in contact with them, and they're also promoting some of my videos now in their magazine. So check out the latest issue. I think they post 2 different issues a week, and yeah, you can find me, you can find these videos in that magazine. So big shout out to them. Really appreciate the support from them. Really appreciate all the support from all of you guys watching. This show is going places, and it's really fun to be a part of the ride, and it's all thanks to the support from all of you watching at home. So thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the racing this weekend in Atlanta, and I'll see you guys when it's all said and done. See you, everyone.